Hi, this is Fran with Stampendous, and it's Friday, so we have our fabulous fun watercolor series to continue here. And since it's March, we now have 3 new beautiful clear stamp sets for you. This one is the Sketchy Birds, we have Moonlit Wings, and Sunrise Sunset. And we're going to teach a lot of new, very fun ideas with these. And if you have been in your rubber stamp store, you may have seen this wonderful model board, which shows you a preview of what we're going to do in the month of March. And we're going to start with some of the simple ones here in this first week, and next week we'll step it up, and each week of the month we will do some additional fun things with the same 3 sets. Here you can see my original that I did with the watercolor and the index that we did from it. Here we're seeing the actual clear stamps on the panel, and it's high quality clear stamps to give you a really nice, good impression. And this one, we showed all of the color on it just to give you the idea of how much fun we're going to have with sunrises and sunsets. This is class 105, and I wanted to start by talking about some different styles of watercolor. And if you haven't seen some of the earlier episodes, we've been using the Daniel Smith paints. Only this one set of 6 is giving us all the colors that we're doing, and we're using this palette in a very specific way. We've got our wonderful brush here and our water system and everything ready to go. And I just wanted to highlight whatever, if watercolor is totally new to you, you maybe haven't really thought about different styles and approaches to watercolor. But I did these ahead to kind of just talk about, you may like a minimal style, which has very soft, almost pastel colors, very simple approach. Or you may like to be a more playful, whimsical, or whimsy style where you just can't help putting patterns and polka dots onto things. Or you might prefer a natural style and use more muted colors and get a more realistic look. Or you may be throw the paint all over mixed media style where you just work everything into the plan. And you may not have developed your own watercolor style yet, but I wanted to start by showing you these just so that you can see, as you learn the techniques and follow along, you can adapt it to whichever style is most suited to what you like. And you may discover some things along the way. I encourage you to try the variety that we're going to show, and that will help you determine what combination perhaps of these is where you like to do your best watercolor work. So let's start in with some things with the birds. I'm using this special palette that has all these compartments for me to work with the 6 colors in a particular way. And I've got my spritz bottle, and before I get too much of my paper in place, I'm spritzing to revive all the colors. None of this paint is wasted, and I can always revive the colors that I had before. So now I'm using my needle tip bottle to replenish some water into each of these areas where I have a place to mix these different colors. I'm using the Canson watercolor paper, cold press, 140 pound, and with this 9x12 sheet, it was a perfect plan to get a dozen little 3x3 inch squares to paint on for the birds. I wanted to mention just a couple of things here. If your approach is the natural style, you need to be able to do a lot of neutral colors. And let me show you. If you haven't seen the earlier videos, we've developed a color wheel. And this uses only the 6 colors that we're working with. And it's amazing to see how the 3 warm primary colors, when totally mixed together, give me beautiful browns. The 3 cool primaries, when totally mixed together, will give me all of my cool blacks. And I have an area for those colors to be done up here in the top area of my palette. And the palette also comes with a diagram so that you can place your colors in exactly the same way that I have, which will make the color mixing techniques that I show you very easy. So up here we have the 3 warm primaries and here the 3 cool. And if I simply take a wet brush, and you can see my water supply over here, I've got a small container that I call my well water, and I keep that for clean water, and my swamp is where I clean my brush over here. So now, just to start with, if I want to get some brown or a light brown, I simply swirl my brush between that triad of those 3 colors, and I can dip into more of the red or more of the blue to darken it, or more of the gamboge to lighten it. And ultimately I've kind of created an area here where I keep a darker blend of a dark brown up here, and then if I want a more of a reddish brown, I kind of have added that to this compartment. If I add more of, this is actually the gamboge yellow color, then I can get a softer brown there. And I use this last compartment and add some water to have a nice tan color. Okay, so on this little bird, I added some soft washes already, and I just wanted to highlight for those of you that haven't seen any of the other color mixing, this is where I go to get my more neutral colors. And just quickly over here, if I swirl these 3 around, this takes a little bit longer and a little bit more work, but I can totally mix those together and get some more of the darker grays and blacks. Okay, if I get only the 2, I end up with purple. I add the yellow and it neutralizes it. Okay. I also use scrap watercolor paper as a test strip. And a paper towel for a blotter. So once I have these in hand, it gives me a foolproof way of proceeding where I know what's on my brush. So is my brush clean? Ah, okay, it's clean. And let's say I want some little bit of a medium to a reddish brown. I test it for color and also for how wet it is. So I need a little bit darker and drier bit of brown. But the Daniel Smith paints always revive with water, and so a drier brush with this darker color allows me to add the detail for my little bird. Okay? So those are just a couple of tips. If you're into the natural colors, you'll need to know where some of those colors can get mixed easily. When I first get a new set of stamps, I like to play and experiment. And as you can see here, I tried a whole bunch of different colors and patterns with the birds. There's 3 different little birds in the set. And if you don't know what different species of birds, how the coloring and their feathers are, get some reference material. This is the Birds in Bloom, and for example, I was able to take a look at this photo, and that kind of gave me the idea of doing the colors on this one. This is a Kirtland's warbler, but who would know that? So you really have the freedom to do whatever colors you like, and you can see that he can be very colorful or look more natural in whatever style you want to do with it. The set also has some very nice additional designs of the leaves and the flowers, and you can see you can make a lot of fun patterns and circles with them. The problem with these were that they got rather big and it didn't work so well for my card sizes. So if you saw the earlier video, we talked about some standard sizes that make really good use of your full watercolor sheet and give you a good yield of 5 cards that will fit an A2 card size perfectly, whether it's an inner panel or the black one is the outer framed size. So I would suggest, in working with some oversized designs like this, that the easiest way to make them fit for your cards is to do your stamping on one of these pre-cut panels. So let's do that real quick and just see how it comes together. I'm using my VersaFine black ink, which is the perfect ink for your watercolor work. Ink it completely, make sure it's all covered, and press firmly. And I'm going to speed this up just so you get a couple different ideas of what you can do. There you have 2 nice compositions that will work on your A2 cards, and you might enjoy painting them in whichever style you like. So give that a try. And for cleaning up your stamps, I just wanted to mention a couple things. We have a rubber stamp cleaner in a spray bottle, which can be helpful, easy way to clean up. We also have rubber stamp cleaner with a dauber top, and this works as a scrubber. It has a textured little bit at the top, and whichever way is easiest for you, we've got lots of options. We also offer the bottles empty, and you can fill them with whatever substance you like. I often use alcohol on one. And if your acrylic handles need cleaning, then the alcohol is the easiest to clean the blocks. And anyway, you could clean them up while they're still on the handles before you put them away. Put them back onto the carrier. Next, we're going to do a very simple little card here with the butterfly and just highlight our different beautiful colors. And I wanted to reference that if you cut your watercolor sheet into the 5 sizes for the A2 like this, you have this one little panel down here that's a leftover piece, and that could be just what you need to do this little tiny painting here. And other ones that are a little bit larger, I found another really good combination here. If you cut your watercolor sheet into half at 4.5 going all the way down, then you can use a variety of widths and still get a yield of 10 little vertical panels. And we're going to use quite a few of those in the next couple of little projects. Okay, so to do our little rainbow stripes here on our butterfly, we're going to prepare all of our little puddles. We want a puddle of each of these primary colors, and the paint that I put into the little pocket is pure, wonderful Daniel Smith paint. I make sure that I keep this area totally clean so that I can get a really nice yellow when I want it. And then the colors are in position the way they work in the rainbow. They mix the easiest that way. They're considered analogous. And I can work from my yellow over to the next color with a lot less worry about the color mixing together. And we'll get a nice vivid with the gamboge. And then just keep the next color clear. The next is my scarlet. And the palette chart will give you the full names of each of these colors. but I just refer to this one as Scarlet. And I want a puddle that's pretty good bold color there, not too watery. And then this one is the quinacridone Rose. And again, I want a puddle of that over here. So each of these primary colors has a place in my palette. And my blue, this is my phthalo blue, which is what we're going to use. And the marine blue I sometimes refer to as the outside blue. And here we have yellow in each compartment, and we've added each of the blues in the same order. This gives me a place to mix my green. And if I want it to be more of a lime green, I just add more yellow. I want some more yellow up here at the top. And I'll kind of move this darker green down. Then the more blue I add, the darker green I'll get. But I can see I need to move this down to have a place to get some of the lighter green. Okay, that looks about what I want. Okay, and here we have a yellow and the darker blue, which will give me the nice olive colors that you see here. To have a nice rainbow of beautiful colors, I think it's easiest to start with the yellow, since that's the trickiest to keep clean. You can see my swamp water is real swampy, but I still have clean well water. So we're going to come in here, and this is actually looking a little bit light. So I'll make sure on my test, okay, that I've got a nice... So I'm going to do 2 of these at the same time here. And try to do this with one nice stroke all the way down. So if you're working rather dry, you could go to the next color and it would probably work okay. But since I want to show you a way that you can keep each of the colors exactly the way you want them, then we're going to skip a stripe area for the gamboge, and we're going to go over here to the orange. And by preparing all your puddles, you can move quickly back and forth between the different ones. So now I'm going to come to the blue over here. I'll test it. That's a little bit dark. I'll get a little bit more water on my brush. I'm testing for color and for how wet it is. If your brush is real puddly, it's going to be harder to work with. So okay, that looks a little bit light, so I'm going to see if I can follow right on top of it. Then I was sort of forgetting to do these little dots, which I think is just kind of a fun little bit to add here. And these stripes could be any length. They can be slightly different shape, and it's all going to work real fun. I'm going to do my gamboge color next, which is in between these 2. And you could intentionally leave just a little bit of white between, or if you moved right next to each color and you didn't mind them running together a little bit, it might give you a nice look as long as your brush and color was on the drier side and not too wet and puddly. Okay, so now I can do my rose. And your drying time may be different than mine. I have bright lights here that are drying things quicker. Might as well do a couple of them while you've got your puddles going, right? And while one thing is drying, you've got something else you can work on. Now I'm going to my green. I wanted to mention that if you haven't subscribed yet, I hope you will. You need your YouTube account set up in order to subscribe, and then you will get alerts when the next videos come out. And I hope you're following along, and remember, you can watch them at your own pace. You can go back and look at ones that were released earlier, and even the countdown videos have a lot of information in case you need some more information about brushes or paper choices. All of that is in there. And I often like to pause and paint and then go back and watch the next part. So you've got all of those capabilities at your fingertips. It looks like I never did the orange on this one. And we'll add it now. Okay, these little panels came out a little bit uneven. Once they're dry, I may go back and trim the edges a little bit further. And this card is as simple as this, where I used the little hello stamp in the set to make a random pattern for the background. And I stamped that just in a blue color ink, and that just finished it off quite nicely. The Moonlit Wings set also has these beautiful silhouetted, wild, wispy, natural, I'm not sure exactly what they are, wispy greens. And I did them as a silhouette so that it would be easy technique to do these washes across the whole thing. And so on one of them here, I took the liberty of using the fine line masking pen, which we introduced last week or so, and you can go back and get some more information about it. But it has this really fine tip and the wire inside, and that allowed me to simply put that covering of the mask in all these little areas of the flowers, and I added some other little dots. And once we paint over it, we will be able to see that white showing through. On this one, I sort of painted around it, and this one I just did washes across the whole area. So here you can see some brighter colors, and here maybe some of the more natural, kind of more muted colors. And so this is a good one to practice two colors wet on wet and letting them kind of work together. And if you're not sure how colors are going to mix, you can always use the layout of your palette to pick two colors that are next to each other. And that will be an easy way to have colors that even if they mix, you get some beautiful results. And so let's do one here where we do a little bit of these muted colors here, just to show you a couple other mixing things. Okay, so it's good to have our puddles ready ahead of time. So over here, I have rose in two more compartments by itself here, and then with each of the blues here, the outside blue, marine, and the phthalo blue here. So if I get a nice wet brush, I can mix a little bit of rose and even less of the blue together, or whatever combination, and that's how I get my lovely purples, okay? So I might push a darker purple down into this edge, and then if I want more of a magenta, I get more of the rose color, and maybe I want a puddle of that ready. And then with the other blue, I would get more of a royal purple, and I could have a place for that over here in this corner of the palette. Okay? I'm also using the phthalo blue by itself, so I'm going to have my puddle of that ready. Okay, and over here, this yellow, the same Hansa yellow light with the marine blue, gives me some lovely olivey colors of green. And again, I can dip into more yellow if I want a light olive. A little bit more of the blue goes a long way for giving me a darker olivey color. Okay, I wanted you to be able to see my area up here in the top of the palette where I mix my browns and my cool blacks. So by mixing this is where I'm going to get my neutral colors, by adding a bit of this color to tone down and give a more muted color. So rather than getting this area all dark with the colors from up here, I think it's easier to lift some of the green up here to this area of the palette. Make sure I'm not out of view for you here. There we go. So I'm just lifting it on my brush to get some of the mossy greens up there. And we're going to start with that. And I didn't test it, did I? So that's a little bit dark, but that's okay. I'm liking that. And while this is still wet, I need to add my other colors. So now I'm going to get a bit of this purple puddle and move it up here so that I add a little bit more of that grayish color, and let's test it. Oh, that's nice. So now I'm adding that, and while it's next to the green, it'll just mix together a little bit. So I'm encouraging you to try some more mixed colors that can be beautiful and fun to work with together. So now I'm adding the blue, and since this one is a soft enough color, so this is the vignette approach where I'm just adding color, and since I have that masking pen of white in there, I want to add enough color to it for that white to really pop. And I realized there was some more over here. So I found that pre-mixing the puddle is very helpful because I could never mix that exact same shade of muted purple again. So, and if I go back with a second pass, it might look like it's blended when it's wet, and then it dries and it looks all muddled. So one pass is better, but I'm working dangerously here to add more to that since I still had a bit of that mossy green puddle. Okay? So these were relatively dry next to each other. I might take a damp brush and kind of just let them merge together a little bit more. And because I pre-cut my paper, it is bowing a little bit with the moisture. So I'm going to tip it back in, but I can see already that that's going to give me a watermark. So I'm going to try to blend that a little bit more. And you'll kind of find out where you're overworking it and you wish you'd left it the way it was to start with. Okay, so that's drying, and once it's dry, then I can rub away all the little bits of the masking pen and let all those little bits really pop out. So let's take a look at the card, the way I finished it off. I had a clean edge on the watercolor paper, a torn edge here, and then you can see this real fun background, and this is so easy to do. And using your large stamp, I would suggest that you start somewhere in the middle of the card and then keep moving it around to fill in as continuous a pattern as you can across the front of the card. And if it goes on to the back, I think that's just kind of a nice touch anyway. So there's a very nice little free wet-on-wet wash. I'll mention on this one that after it dried, I went back in and enhanced it a little bit more with some darker blue. But you'd want to wait, if you want that detail, let the background dry first, and then you could add it in. It's too soon to rub away the mask, which will come away just like rubber cement, so we'll have to do that later. Next, we're going to work with the sunrise, sunset set. And I've got all of these little long narrow strips, which make it the easiest place to start with learning these techniques. And you can go to a larger panel once you're comfortable with it. The first couple of ones had a torn edge and a simple vignette, and I found it was more work to balance out my gradient colors when I had to keep reworking an area in a vignette compared to doing a taped edge. So I've taken two of the little panels, and we talked about last week doing this on a grid, but I wanted to keep it right up close for you. So I've prepared this one on my small clipboard. And just so you know, if you didn't see the other episode about taping, I'm removing the tack of my inexpensive masking tape by doing it a couple of times like that on my working mat. And then when I press it down, I will be more able to remove it at the end without it tearing the paper, okay? But I like the neutral color of the masking tape. So let's do one first in the blues, and then we'll add more color. One of the tricky things about doing a sky with perhaps a little bit of color on the horizon is that you're working with your blue and your yellow, but you don't want it to mix into green. Not in the sky generally. So having the taped edges, and I think that the phthalo blue is the more forgiving color to start with, and I'm simply going to see if by adding more water I can create a smooth gradient of color. And this may take some practice just to see how much water and how much paint and everything you need. But that taped edge will allow me to keep this small area wet so that the colors blend together the easiest. I just realized I was getting a hard line down here at the bottom. So having some more water on this edge is important. And as you've noticed, we're going to do the sky first and then stamp our other images at the end. So it's a practice skill to get a perfect gradient here. So I'm just going to kind of work it back and forth and go from dark and try to do a fade out here at the bottom. And like we did in some of the very first brush techniques, we talked about this skill of a mop-up technique. And this allows me to use my watercolor brush to lift color. So I realize I need more water here to be able to lift. And then I'm blotting and cleaning my brush to see if I can eliminate that line. I let it dry. I've noticed some watercolor artists choose to work at an angle, and they talk about having a bead of water as the leading edge working down the page, and that keeps from having any hard water lines at that lower edge. And I find that getting a perfect gradient takes more patience than I have a lot of times. So it's up to you whether you want to practice and get really good at a perfect gradient that looks airbrushed, or whether, as is my tendency, I think it looks interesting when it's a little bit irregular, and so I decide I'm moving on. So well, let's see here. Again, the taped edges makes it easier to rework. Okay. And you'll find you get to a point where reworking it creates more problems. See, like that, I'm lifting more than I'm putting down. So you can practice, and you may be better at it than I am in no time. Okay, so I'm going to let that dry. I got a splash over here. And the importance of not getting green in the sky is that I'm going to let the blues dry first and later come back with the yellows. And as it's drying, particularly here with the lamp, the heat of these bright lights, I can see I'm getting some strange watermarks that if I notice it as it's drying, I may try to blend it together with a damp brush. Okay, while that's drying, next we will try a gradient with several colors. So on our earlier one, we started with the light colors of yellow at the horizon and we worked our way up. This time I'm going to do it in reverse order, and you may find you like one way better than the other. So if you can get the hang of one pass of it, all the better, because you will get a more even gradient that way. So I'm going to make sure I've got some puddles ready in advance. You might prepare your puddles in the reverse order of how you're going to work, but since I said we'd start with dark, I'll clean my brush and we'll start with our purples here. It's going to dry some lighter than what you see here. So it's going to blend the easiest if it's all wet on wet within that taped area and your puddles are ready in advance, and studying how much water, how much pigment you need is all part of the learning process. And now this one is needs to dry, and you can see here that you can try to learn how to do an even gradient. Or if you find it's just not working and you like the little clouds that are created, I did that on this one, and it's up to you. Each one you do will come out differently, and each time you do it, you'll like it better. So there's still lots to learn, and each week we're going to add to the complexity of what we do with our sunsets. So I wanted to start with the simple things here. And now that this has had a chance to dry, we will add just a little bit of color down here. The more overlap I have of the colors, the more I'm going to get green, which we don't want. So letting the blue fade to white, and then just that little bit of yellow. So now I'm actually mopping up a little bit there. So while that's drying, I will talk about how usually I find that it's easiest to do my washes first and then stamp these other little silhouettes along the skyline in black after it's completely dry. If I stamp into it damp, I'm not going to get a clean impression. And I forgot one time that I took the tape off before I stamped. So generally you're going to want to stamp with the tape in place. If you don't get a nice black, the best thing is to have a fine line pen and just do a little bit of touch-up. It may not need much. And over here, I did make an attempt to use a real dark green paint and paint it on the stamp itself, but it's not so easy to do. You tend to get it too wet, and then it just kind of flows into all the crevices. So I think stamping it in black is good, and then you could add a little bit of green. On this one, it came out so light that I painted back in some green on top, and that still gave me an interesting look, and I'll still enjoy making that into a card. I came up with all the stamps in this set from my early morning walks. I would get up at 5:30 and head out the door and watch the sun come up, and it was so interesting in my neighborhood to look at the silhouetted different types of trees. And living here in California, I've got pine trees, I've got cypress trees, I've got palm trees, and I gave you separate stamps, but you can put them all together and create your neighborhood. Oh, now see, that gave me a really nice black impression there. Very nice. And move them up and down, move the different ones together to create more of a horizontal skyline, however you want. So if you haven't already, be sure and subscribe with your YouTube account so that you can follow each of our videos, and be sure and look for lots of more fabulous fun watercolor next Friday.